I'm Emily Wojcik.
I'm 佳琪庄.
I'm Eleanor Henriksen.
And I'm Daniel Murphy.
And I'm Jada Barney.
Okay, so about me, I want to talk about the Brazilian film's history. And from the Oxford bibliography, I found the Brazilian film studies came to prominence in the 1960s and 1970s with the rise of the avant-garde, politicized Nuevo cinema movement, which resonated with new types of cinema in Europe, especially France, and other parts of Latin America. Since then, the scope of academic studies in Portuguese and English has expanded to include commercial Brazilian cinema in the earlier era, and also to include the popular genres and the historical evolution of Brazilian cinema and the relationship of the new film industry to the state throughout the 20th century. Recently, a number of scholars, both in Brazil and abroad, have analyzed Brazilian cinema from a thematic point of view, especially after the production of rebirth films from the mid 1990s, focusing on the reinterpretation of new film themes such as poverty and violence such as Central Station and the City of God. Since Robert Steam's seminal work, issues of race and ethnicity have continued to be the focus of Brazilian film studies, as have issues of sexuality and gender. Scholars are increasingly turning their attention to national and transnational issues in film and looking at Brazilian film history from new perspectives, such as the role of meaning of film stars and their marketing and the relationship of film to other media and arts.
I think that when you look at the history of Brazilian filmmaking, you can see there's a big shift between how Brazilian films were originally created and how they were influenced by like dictatorship at one time, and how they were incredibly censored. Like you weren't able to put anything anti-political or anti-government, and I guess you can feel some at least some aftershock of that in this film. So when I read a little bit about what the directors were going for in terms of genre, because I mean the movie is sort of dynamic. I mean you're in like a desert setting, and it almost seems really kind of like happy-go-lucky at times. Like these people are really self-sufficient and satisfied with their lives, and then like it goes full Western and all these things. So reading from the New York Times, they write that part of what's exciting is how the filmmakers marshal genre in the service of their ideas, using film form to deflect, tease, and surprise. The movie looks and plays like a Western, but flirts with dystopian and science fiction in pure pulp. By the time the cult killer Udo Kier rolls up, it's clear anything gleefully goes. So it is a dynamic movie that has a lot of shifts, and you can kind of tease out influences from what at one time might have been like we have this military force coming to like disappear a town essentially. I mean, you can see they're off the map, they're taking their power, they're taking away their service, and it's interesting when you look at the history of Brazilian films how that might still be influencing this.
Just touching on that and like just thinking from like a background perspective, I feel like kind of also going back to what you were saying about how like the Brazilian film industry has like come to be. I actually found a book called Remapping Brazilian Film Culture in the 21st Century, which kind of offered more insight on like how we made the transition from that to like what we watched for this project. There was a line on the in the abstract, it was on page 13, that said, to address, at least on paper, The frequently aired concern that film producers are giving no incentive to make films that engage with audiences. The Primo Addicenso de Renda, or the Additional Income Prize, was introduced in 2005 to reward independent filmmakers for box office success. I don't think this film was awarded that like box office incentive, but I think that's just like kind of interesting, like how like there is little like money offered for like films that like connect like Western culture and like Western themes, like to get these Brazilian films produced and put out.
Yeah, I actually read sort of similarly around when politics were heavily influencing Brazilian filmmaking culture, they would subsidize people to make films that were not politically motivated and were not anti-government. And then when we moved back, when that was removed, Brazilian filmmakers had almost no way to incentivize or to make any money or to get any money to make films. So it's if there's any struggle in the industry, it's due to your lack of like money flowing into it to create films.
Right, and it also like definitely speaks to like the resilience of Brazilian cinema. There was another line that was actually the beginning of the book, which was like it was like the first sentence of the abstract, which said, "Brazil is figured along the lines of the most world cinema cultures, in that its film industry is shaped by multiple economic, ideological, social, and cultural exigencies that are compounded by U.S. domination of the local film market and the consequent need for diverse forms of state support." So I feel like that just kind of brings like what you were talking about to also just like the production of it all, and also what you were talking about, like the history of that industry itself.
I agree. I think maybe like them being incentivized to appeal to a Western audience may explain why there's so much English in this film, because I expected a totally like foreign language film, but it was like half of the dialogue was in English when they talked, and then they just had their subtitles, and that just like kind of threw me off guard because I was like expecting and locked in to like watch a foreign language film, because there is like this extra effort, since like a lot of like Western audiences are catered to a little too much, where we just like are just like, oh, we have to read subtitles next. Like a lot of like even popular like foreign films like Studio Ghibli still have like a lot of like dubbed and dubbed versions, like The Boy and the Heron. Yeah, and like they use like not even those original cast members, they use like popular like Western movie stars like Robert Pattinson. Oh, I'm forgetting all the other ones.
Wait, yeah.
Emily Blunt, I think, was in one.
Yes.
Oh yeah, The Boy and the Heron had like crazy famous acting. Christian Bale.
Christian Bale,
Oh,
isn't it?
yeah.
Really?
He was in one. He was Howl from
Yeah.
Howl's Moving Castle, which is just
Same
crazy.
thing with like Spirited Away. Had a bunch of famous. It was weird.
I also wanted to talk. I had a lot of similarities from like my scholarly article. It was Brazilian Cinema, Its Rise, Fall, and Renewal, which is by Rego, who's associated with the University of Kansas. There was a lot of, like you said, a lot of government control. I think there's a specific quote that says that a lot of independent filmmakers weren't necessarily independent because they were so dependent on their government officials to get the proper funding.
Yes, exactly.
There's also this one line that really spoke to me, and like you can like see it all throughout, is a salient feature of Brazilian cinema is that it undergoes periodical births and rebirths, and after brief peaks, it is afflicted by sudden deaths and prolonged silences. And I thought that was like
That's hard hitting.
like really specific to our film, because there was like this peak of like Carmelita, she dies, and there's like this peak, and then like sudden deaths, like oh my god, this family ranch is they're all dead, and there is like a silence that like they're silenced, they're taken off the map, they have no signal, they are completely silenced, like they're gone. There is also this part about how the Brazilian cinema like industry, like again, were incentivized like to beat the Western like cinema, about how Brazil during that time of dictatorship, they were competing against Western films, where like they were invaded by all these like foreign films. They weren't able to compete with all these like American films, and you kind of see that with the Americans and the German guy who says he's American. It's very upset when he's not called American.
And those characters are introduced to us in like flashy dirt bike outfits,
Yeah.
riding and
Like
speaking
movie
American.
epics,
Yeah, it's-
blockbusters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was like I struggled to find something that specifically talked about this film, but when I just typed in Brazilian cinema, this one was just so oddly specific to our film, and there is like a huge political statement in this film about being
Yeah, I mean,
silenced and
They
like
bury
politicians.
him alive.
Yeah.
They bury
Yeah.
the German Udo alive. Crazy.
20th century arrived, and with it came an explosion of interest in the silver screen for Brazil's first generation of moviegoers. Soon, motion pictures from Hollywood were making their way south to inspire emerging filmmakers. So that's like a way our film culture inspired others to make movies like ours. It didn't take long. In 1908, Brazil fell in love with its first box office hit. I don't even know how. Estrange Guladores. Okay. Tells the story of a criminal enterprise gone wrong, and audiences flock to see it. A short film of only 35 minutes, it also ignited Brazil's first movie genre. Crime dramas often reenacted stories taken from the headlines just days or weeks before. By 1912, Brazilian films dominated movie theaters across Brazil's urban centers, averaging 100 films annually. 2 decades later, even most of Brazil's smaller cities had their own movie theaters, and by the 1930s, Brazil had become Hollywood's third largest foreign market worldwide. So that's like around the same time, like the 20s, when our market started getting huge, because that's like the golden era of film. It's also when Carmen Miranda became Brazil's first international movie star. In 1930, Carmen Miranda was already Brazil's highest paid singer. Brazilian movie studios rushed to include her in a series of films revolving around samba and carnival. 4 years later, Cinearts magazine called her the most popular figure in Brazilian cinema. And Carmen's Miranda arrival in New York in May 1939 marked a turning point for Brazil's film industry. So around the same time we were creating our big movie stars, they did the same thing with Carmen Miranda. You could say that's like their Marilyn Monroe to us, like how we made her big for those eras. She was like their top star. They wanted her in like everything and really pushed her to become great, and she ended up coming here to make movies and everything because she was so pivotal in that era.
I see a lot of similarities with our industry, and even like the one film we discussed in class when we were talking about antiques, talking about trees, and they're like, why would you even like try to make a movie? You don't even have a camera. It's all about the love of movies. Like all these small towns have movie theaters because we're doing all this because we just love movies, and other like industries are clearly at a disadvantage. Like the one movie talking about trees didn't have a camera really when they were doing like, oh, we're gonna make this great film. You don't even have a camera. You don't even have like a female actress. You have to have a man like swathe himself in a scarf. You're like, ooh.
No lights. They use flashlights. And
Yeah.
stuff.
I feel like it's just like a way to like that, like it's just something that almost everybody agrees on. Like maybe not everybody, but I think a lot of people do like find a way to come together, like through cinema and through film and through like its process and like how much love and like attention it takes.
Yeah, because like a lot of like, especially like, you know, during COVID there was like the and I don't know what I'm talking about COVID. During COVID we talked about what is a necessary job and unnecessary, and all you see like on these lists are like, oh, we need engineers, software, digital, nurses, but then we forget like how important movies are to us,
Right.
And that we're like, oh yeah, actors,
And media,
directors,
like media in general.
and like all these very important films came out, and people were just like the movie like streaming services boomed because people still wanted to watch movies despite like all this suffering and distress.
Yeah. You just made me think about around the 20s and 30s, like when the Great Depression happened. That's when the movie industry was like going up as well, because people were they didn't have any money. Like the whole world actually was going through it. So movies was like the only thing people could turn to for like happiness. So that's why they kept churning them out. It was like, oh, come see this movie. I mean, you might not have the money to pay for it. I mean, it was probably cheap anyway. But you could still, you know, come out and enjoy life. You don't have to be depressed.
Yeah. It's definitely a metric of, I mean, there were walls that Brazilian filmmakers had to jump through that we
Yeah.
never did in
Yeah,
the United
because we
States.
just had.
Not to say that we didn't have eras where it was harder,
Mhm.
but I mean they had genuine eras where they couldn't say things in movies, and
Yeah.
it's impressive to see how resilient they were and how willing they were to a lot of times put their lives on the line to get the message they wanted to out, even when when they're occupied. Saying the wrong thing could have meant you got killed.
Yeah.
Right.
And, oh, you
Oh
go.
no, I was gonna say like that certainly is, that doesn't go without saying that American film like doesn't have history, but I feel like there is that like under level like that American cinema, like early American cinema, like just doesn't necessarily have, because there was no like fear.
Mhm. I just thought it was really impressive because again, like there was so many stuff like not even like you couldn't show but couldn't even like say and utter. Like you could see that in American industry,
Right.
but like that Brazilian was like much more recent. And like what did we see in this film? We saw like male, female nudity. We saw a man's like head blown off, and we saw the aftermath of that. We saw like
Heads cut off.
heads cut off, like a politician being like put out into the desert. Like it is
Yeah.
clearly like we're going
Anti
all
like
out.
anti censorship, I would
Yeah,
say.
totally.
Like, that is very, very interesting.
This film was a
The
triumph.
film really works for that too.
Film was really good, and I'm upset we couldn't talk about the narrative as much because I thought like there was a UFO drone. I thought that was really cool. But
Yeah, I
this
was
one,
like, where did UFO come
I
from?
know.
Like,
And it's like so interesting the way the villains are using like ancient weapons. Like they're
Yeah.
using weapons that were weapons of mass destruction from an old time, while also using like it's like they're televising like killing these people using this drone. It literally looked like a helicopter scene chase from like a news station when they were giving like reconnaissance to the guy and the girl who went out to shoot the couple in the car. And I was like, this looks like something you see on the news. It's
Right.
crazy the way they
Yeah.
made like a game out of taking advantage of these people, and they got what came to them, I guess.
What a creatively structured film.
It's like a time paradox because there's all these like futuristic things while you're also seeing like ancient tradition and like so much rich culture that you're like can't really tell what it's from, and then you meet all these like I don't know, that German guy who is clearly kind of convinced that he's American, but I don't know, it's interesting.